Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. Today is episode 20 of Sutton and Wall Street and episode 2 of Wall Street and Hitler. Picking up where we left off, polishing I.G. Farben's public image. This miserable picture of pre-war military preparation was known abroad and had to be sold or disguised to the American public in order to facilitate Wall Street fundraising and technical assistance on behalf of I.G. Farben in the United States. A prominent New York public relations firm was chosen for the job of selling the I.G. Farben Combine to America. The most notable public relations firm in the 1920s and 1930s was Ivy Lee and T.J. Ross of New York. Ivy Lee had previously undertaken a public relations campaign for the Rockefellers to spruce up the Rockefeller name among the American public. The firm had also produced a sycophantic book entitled USSR, undertaking the same cleanup task for the Soviet Union, even while Soviet labor camps were in full blast in the late 20s and early 30s. From 1929 onwards, Ivy Lee became Public Relations Counsel for I.G. Farben in the United States. In 1934, Ivy Lee presented testimony to the House Un-American Activities Committee on the work of Farben. Lee testified that I.G. Farben was affiliated with the American Farben firm, and the American I.G. is a holding company with directors such people as Edsel Ford, Walter Teagle, one of the officers of the Citibank. Lee explained that he was paid $25,000 per year under contract made with Max Ilgner of I.G. Farben. His job was to counter criticism leveled at I.G. Farben within the United States. The advice given by Ivy Lee to Farben on this problem was acceptable, though. In the first place, I have told them that they could never in the world get the American people to reconcile to their treatment of the Jews, that was just foreign to the American mentality and could never be justified in the American public opinion, and there was no use trying. In the second place, anything that savored of Nazi propaganda in this country was a mistake. It ought not to be taken, and ought not to be done under, and not ought to be undertaken. Our people regarded it as a meddling with American affairs, and it was bad business. The initial payment of $4,500 to Ivy Lee under this contract was made by Hermann Schmitz, chairman of I.G. Farben in Germany. It was deposited in the New York Trust Company under the name of I.G. Chemic, or the Swiss I.G. as Ivy Lee termed it. However, the second and major payment of $14,450 was made by William Van Rath of the American I.G. and also deposited by Ivy Lee in the New York Trust Company for the credit of his personal account. This firm account was at the Chase Bank. This point about the origin of the funds is important when we consider the identity of directors of American I.G., because payment by American I.G. meant the bulk of Nazi propaganda funds were not of German origin. They were American funds earned in the U.S. and under control of American directors, although used for Nazi propaganda in the United States. In other words, most of the Nazi propaganda funds handled by Ivy Lee were not imported from Germany. The use to which the American funds were put was brought out under questioning by the House Un-American Activities Committee. Mr. Dickinson, as I understand, you testify that you received no propaganda at all and that you had nothing to do with the distribution of propaganda in this country. Mr. Lee, I did not testify I received none, Mr. Dickinson. Mr. Dickinson, I will eliminate that part of the question then. Mr. Lee, I testified that I disseminated none whatsoever. Mr. Dickinson, have you received, or has your firm received, any propaganda literature from Germany at any time? Mr. Lee, yes, sir. Mr. Dickinson, and when was that? Mr. Lee, we received it. A question of what you call propaganda. We have received an immense amount of literature. Mr. Dickinson, you do not know what the literature was and what it contained. Mr. Lee, we have received books and pamphlets and newspaper clippings and documents, world without end. Mr. Dickinson, I assume someone in your office would go over them and see what they see. Mr. Lee, yes, sir. Mr. Dickinson, and then after you found out what they were, I assume you kept copies of them. Mr. Lee, in some cases, yes, and in some, no. A great many of them, of course, were in German, and I had what my son sent me. He said they were interesting and significant, and these I had transferred or excerpts of them made. Finally, Ivy Lee employed Burnham Carter to study American newspaper reports on Germany and prepare suitable pro-Nazi replies. It should be noted that this German literature was not Farben literature, it was official Hitler literature. Mr. Dickinson, in other words, you receive this material that details with the German conditions today. You examine it and you advise them. It has nothing to do with the German government, although the material, the literature, is official language of the Hitler regime. That is correct, is it not? Mr. Lee, well, a good deal of the literature was not official. Mr. Dickinson, it was not IG literature, was it? Mr. Lee, no, IG sent it to me. Mr. Dickinson, can you show us one scrap of paper that came in here that has anything to do with IG? Mr. Lee, oh yes, they issue a good deal of literature, but I do not want to beg the question. There is no question whatever that under their authority I have received any immense amount of material that came from official and unofficial sources. Mr. Dickinson, exactly. In other words, the material that was sent here by the IG was material spread. We could call it propaganda by authority of the German government. But the distinction that you make in your statement is, as I take it, that the German government did not send it to you directly, that it was sent to you by the IG. Mr. Lee, right. Mr. Dickinson, and had it nothing to do with their business relations just now? Mr. Lee, that is correct. The American IG Farben. Who were the prominent Wall Street establishment financiers who directed the activities of American IG, the IG Farben affiliate in the United States promoting Nazi propaganda? American IG Farben directors include some of the more prominent members of Wall Street. German interests re-entered the United States after World War I and successfully overcame barriers designed to keep IG out of the American market. Neither seizure of the German patents, establishment of the Chemical Foundation, nor high tariff walls were a major problem. By 1925, General Dyestuff Corporation was established as the exclusive selling agent for products manufactured by Gaseli Dyestuff, renamed General Aniline Works Inc. in 1929, and imported from Germany. The stock of General Aniline Works was transferred in 1929 to American IG Chemical Corporation and later in 1939 to General Aniline and Film Corporation, into which American IG and General Aniline Works were merged. American IG and its successor, General Aniline and Film, it has to be firm, that can't be film, is the unit through which control of IG's enterprises in the U.S. was maintained. The stock authorization of American IG was 300 million common A shares and 3 million common B shares. In return for the stock interest in General Aniline Works and AFGA Ansco Corporation, IG Farben in Germany received all the B shares and 400,000 A shares. $30 million of convertible bonds were sold to the American public and guaranteed as to principal and interest by the German IG Farben, which received an option to purchase an additional 1 million A shares. Table 2.2, the director of American IG at 1930. Karl Bosch, German, Ford Motor Co. AG. Edsel B. Ford, U.S., Ford Motor Co. Detroit. Max Ilgner, German, director IG Farben, NW7 Intelligence Office, guilty at Nuremberg War Crimes Trials. F. Murr, German, guilty at Nuremberg War Crimes Trials. H. A. Metz, U.S., Director of IG Farben, Germany, and Bank of Manhattan, U.S. C. E. Mitchell, U.S., Director of Federal Reserve Bank of New York and National City Bank. Hermann Schmidt, German, on board of IG Farben, President Germany, Deutsche Bank, Germany, and Bank for International Settlement, guilty at Nuremberg War Crimes Trial. Walter Teagle, U.S. Director, Federal Reserve Bank of New York and Standard Oil of New Jersey. W. H. Jan Rath, naturalized Director of General U.S. Electric, AEG. Paul M. Warburg, U.S., first member of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and Bank of Manhattan. W. E. Weiss, U.S. Sterling Products. Source, Moody Manuals of Instruments, 1930, page 2149. Note, Walter Duisberg, U.S., W. Grief, U.S., and Adolf Kutroff, U.S. were also directors of IG Farben at this period. The arrangement of American IG, later General Aniline, was dominated by IG or former IG officials. See Table 9.9. Hermann Schmidt served as president from 1929 to 1936 and was then succeeded by his brother Dietrich A. Schmidt, a naturalized American citizen, until 1941. Hermann Schmidt, who was also director of the Bank for International Settlements, the apex of the international financial control system, he remained as chairman of the board of directors from 1936 to 1939. The original board of directors, including 9 members who were or had been members of the board of IG Farben in Germany, Hermann Schmidt, Karl Bosch, Max Ilgner, Fritz Dermier, and Wilfred Grief, or had been previously employed by IG Farben in Germany, Walter Duisberg, Adolf Kutroff, W.H. Jan Rath, Hermann A. Metz. Hermann A. Metz was an American citizen, a staunch Democrat in politics, and a former comptroller of the city of New York. A. 10th W.E. Weiss had been under contract to IG. Directors of American IG were not only prominent in Wall Street and American industry, but more significantly were drawn from a few highly influential institutions. Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Charles E. Mitchell, Walter Teagle, Paul M. Warburg. Ford Motor Company, Edsel B. Ford, Carl Bosch. Bank of Manhattan, H.A. Metz, Paul M. Warburg. Standard Oil of New Jersey, Walter Teagle, IG Farben, and American IG. The remaining 4 members of the American IG board were prominent American citizens and members of the Wall Street financial elite. C.E. Mitchell, chairman of National City Bank, and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Edsel B. Ford, president of Ford Motor Company, Walter C. Teagle, W.C. Teagle, another director of Standard Oil of New Jersey, and Paul Warburg, first member of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and chairman of the Bank of Manhattan Company. Directors of American IG were not only prominent in Wall Street and American industry, but more significantly were drawn from a few highly influential institutions. See chart above. Between 1929 and 1939, there were changes in the makeup of the board of American IG. The numbers of directors varied from time to time, although a majority always had IG backgrounds or connections, and the board never had less than 4 American directors. In 1939, presumably looking ahead to World War II, an effort was made to give the board a more American complexion, but despite the resignation of Hermann Schmidt, Karl Bosch, and Walter Duisberg, and the appointment of 7 new directors, 7 members still belonging to the IG group, this IG predominance increased during 1940 and 1941 as American directors, including Edsel Ford, realized the political unhealthiness of IG and resigned. Several basic observations can be made from this evidence. First, the board of American IG had 3 directors from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the most influential of the various Federal Reserve banks. American IG also had interlocks with Standard Oil of New Jersey, Ford Motor Company, Bank of Manhattan, later to become the Chase Manhattan, and AEG, German General Electric. Second, 3 members of the board of this American IG were found guilty at Nuremberg war crimes trials. These were the German, not the American members. Among these Germans was Max Ilgner, director of the IG Farben NW7 office in Berlin, i.e. the Nazi pre-war intelligence office. If the directors of a corporation are collectively responsible for the activities of the corporation, then the American directors should also have been placed on trial at Nuremberg along with the German directors. That is, if the purpose of the trials was to determine war guilt. Of course, even if the purpose of the trials had been to divert attention away from the U.S. involvement in Hitler's rise to power, they succeeded very well in such an objective. All right, Chapter 3, General Electric funds Hitler. Among the early Roosevelt fascist measures was the National Industry Recovery Act, NRA, of June 16, 1933. The origins of this scheme are worth repeating. These ideas were first suggested by Gerard Swoop of the General Electric Company. Following this, they were adopted by the United States Chamber of Commerce. Herbert Hoover, The Memoirs of Herbert Hoover, The Great Depression, 1929 to 1941. The multinational giant General Electric has an unparalleled role in the 20th century history. The General Electric Company electrified the Soviet Union in the 1920s and 1930s and fulfilled for the Soviets Lenin's dictum that socialism equaled electrification. The swoop plan created by General Electric's one-time president, Gerard Swoop, became Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal. By a process deplored by one-time President Herbert Hoover and described in Wall Street and FDR, there was a long-lasting, intimate relationship between Swoop and Young of General Electric Company, and the Roosevelt family as there was between General Electric and the Soviet Union. In 1936, Senator James A. Reed of Missouri, an early Roosevelt supporter, became aware of Roosevelt's betrayal of liberal ideas and attacked the Roosevelt New Deal program as a tyrannical measure leading to despotism and sought by its sponsors under the communistic cry of social justice. Senator Reed further charged on the floor of the Senate that Franklin D. Roosevelt was a hired man for the economic royalists in Wall Street and that the Roosevelt family is one of the largest stockholders in the General Electric Company. As we probe into the behind-the-scenes German interwar history and the story of Hitler and Nazism, we find both Owen D. Young and Gerard Swoop of General Electric tied to the rise of Hitlerism and the suppression of German democracy. That General Electric directors are to be found in each of these three distinct historical categories, i.e. the development of the Soviet Union, the creation of Roosevelt's New Deal, and the rise of Hitlerism, suggest how elements of big business are keenly interested in the socialization of the world for their own purposes and objectives, rather than the maintenance of the impartial marketplace in a free society. General Electric profited handsomely from Bolshevism, from Roosevelt's New Deal socialism, and as we shall see below, from National Socialism in Hitler's Germany. General Electric in Weimar Germany. Walter Rathenau was, until his assassination in 1922, managing director of AEG, or German General Electric, and like Owen Young and Gerard Swoop, his counterparts in the U.S., he was a prominent advocate of corporate socialism. Walter Rathenau spoke out publicly against competition and free enterprise. Why? Because both Rathenau and Swoop wanted the protection and cooperation of the state for their own corporate objectives and profit, but not, of course, for anybody else's objectives and profits. Rathenau expressed their plea in the new political economy. The new economy will, as we have seen, be no state or governmental economy, but a private economy committed to a civic power of resolution, which certainly will require state cooperation for organic consolidation to overcome inner friction and increase production and endurance. When we disentangle the turgid Rathenau prose, this means that the power of the state was to be made available to private firms for their own corporate purposes, i.e., what is popularly known as National Socialism. Rathenau spoke out publicly against competition and free enterprise, inheritance. Not their own wealth so far can be determined, but the wealth of others who lacked political pull in the state apparatus. Owen D. Young of General Electric was one of the 3 U.S. delegates to the 1923 Dawes Plan meeting which established the German Reparations Program. And in the Dawes and Young plans, we can see how some private firms were able to benefit from the power of the state. The largest single loans from Wall Street to Germany during the 1920s were reparation loans. It was ultimately the U.S. investor who paid for German reparations. The cartelization of the German electrical industry under AEG, as well as the steel and chemical industries discussed in Chapter 1 and 2, was made possible with all these Wall Street loans. January 26, 1925, AEG, National City, $10 million. December 9, 1925, AEG, $10 million. May 22nd, 1928, AEG, National City Code, $10 million. June 7th, 1928, AEG, National City Code, $5 million. In 1928, the Young Plan reparations meetings, we find General Electric President Owen D. Young in the chair as the chief U.S. delegate appointed by the U.S. government to use U.S. government power and prestige to decide international financial matters, enhancing Wall Street and General Electric profits. In 1930, Owen D. Young, after whom the Young Plan for German reparations was named, became chairman of the board of General Electric Company in New York City. Young was also chairman of the executive committee of Radio Corporation of America and the director of both German General Electric, AEG, and Osram in Germany. Young also served on the boards of other major U.S. corporations, including General Motors, NBC, and RKO. He was a counselor of the National Industrial Conference Board, a director of the International Chamber of Commerce, and deputy chairman of the board of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Gerard Swoop was president and director of General Electric Company, as well as French and German associated companies, including AEG and Osram in Germany. Swoop was also a director of RCA, NBC, and the National City Bank of New York. Other directors of International General Electric at this time reflect Morgan control of the company, and both Young and Swoop are generally known as the Morgan representatives of the GE board, which included Thomas Cochran, another partner in the J.P. Morgan firm, General Electric, Director Charles Haynes Minor, who's was president of International General Electric in the 1920s. Another director was Victor M. Cutter of the First National Bank of Boston, and a figure in the banana revolutions in Central America. In the late 1920s, Young, Swoop, and Minor of International General Electric moved into the German electrical industry and gained, if not control, as some have reported, then at least a substantial say in the internal affairs of both AEG and Osram. In July 1929, an agreement was reached between General Electric and 3 German firms, AEG, Siemens and Halske, and Koppel and Company, which between them owned all the shares in Osram, the electric bulb manufacturer. General Electric purchased 16% of Osram stock, and reached a joint agreement for international control of electric bulb production and marketing. Clark Minor and Gerard Swoop became directors of Osram. In July 1929, great interest was shown and rumors circulating in German financial circles that General Electric was also buying into AEG, and that talks to this end were in progress between AEG and GE. In August, it was confirmed that 14 million marks of common AEG stock were issued to General Electric. These shares added to the shares bought on the open market, giving General Electric a 25% interest in AEG. A closer working agreement was signed between the two companies, providing the German company U.S. technology and patents. It was emphasized in the news reports that AEG would not have participation in GE, but on the other hand, GE would finance expansion of AEG in Germany. The German financial press also noted that there was no AEG representation on the board of GE in the United States, but the 5 Americans were now on the board of the AEG. The Washington Zeitung recorded, "The American electrical industry has conquered the world, and only a few of the remaining opposing bastions have been able to withstand the onslaught." By 1930, unknown to the official German press, General Electric had similarly gained an effective technical monopoly of the Soviet electrical industry and was soon to penetrate even the remaining bastions in Germany, particularly the Siemens Group. In January 1930, 3 GE men were elected to the board of AEG: Clark H. Minor, Gerard Swoop, and E. H. Baldwin, and International General Electric, IGE, continued its moves to merge the world electrical industry into a giant cartel under Wall Street control. In February, General Electric focused on the remaining German electrical giant, Siemens and Halske, and while able to obtain a large block of debentures issued on behalf of the German firm by Dillon Read of New York, GE was not able to gain participation or directors on the Siemens board. While the German press recognized even this limited control as an historical economic event of the first order and an important step towards a future world electrical trust, Siemens retained its independence from General Electric, and this independence is important for our story. The New York Times reported, "The entire press emphasizes the fact that Siemens, contrary to AEG, maintains its independence for the future and points out that no General Electric representative will sit on Siemens' board of directors." There is no evidence that Siemens, either through Siemens and Halske or Siemens Schuckert, participated directly in financing Hitler. Siemens contributed to Hitler only slightly and indirectly through a share participation in Osram. On the other hand, both AEG and Osram directly financed Hitler through the National Treuhand in substantial ways. Siemens retained its independence in the early 1930s, while both AEG and Osram were under American dominance and with American directors. There is no evidence that Siemens, without American directors, financed Hitler. On the other hand, we have irrefutable documentary evidence, see page 56, that both German General Electric and Osram, both with American directors, financed Hitler. In the following months, following the attempted Wall Street takeover, Siemens, the pattern of a developing world trust in the electrical industry, clarified there was an end to international patent fights, and that GE interest in AEG increased to nearly 30%. Consequently, in the early 1930s, as Hitler prepared to grab dictatorial power in Germany, backed by some, but by no means all German and American industrialists, the German General Electric was owned by International General Electric about 30%. I think that's also AEG, 25%, and Ludwig Loh, 25%. International General Electric also had an interest of about 16 2/3% in Osram, and additional indirect influence in a bunch of German companies I'm not going to say. Osram through AEG directors. On the board of AEG, apart from the 4 American directors, Young, Swoop, Minor, and Baldwin, we find Ferdinand of Oppenheim & Co., another Hitler financier, and Quandt, who owned 75% of Accumulatren Fabrik, a major direct financier of Hitler. In other words, among the German board members of the AEG, we find representatives from several of the German firms that financed Hitler in the 1920s and 30s. General Electric and the financing of Hitler. The taproot of modern corporate socialism runs deep into the management of two affiliated multinational corporations. General Electric Company in the United States and its foreign associates, including German General Electric AEG and Osram in Germany. We have noted that Gerard Swoop, second president and chairman of General Electric, and Walter Rathenau of AEG promoted radical ideas for control of the state by private business interests. From 1915 onwards, International General Electric, IGE, located at 120 Broadway, New York City, acted as the foreign investment in manufacturing and selling organization for the General Electric Company. IGE held interest in overseas manufacturing companies, including a 25 to 30% holding in German General Electric, AEG, plus holdings in Osram, also in Berlin. These holdings gave International General Electric 4 directors on the board of AEG and another director on Osram, and significant influence in the internal domestic policies of these German corporations. The significance of this General Electric ownership is that AEG and Osram were prominent suppliers of funds for Hitler in his rise to power in Germany in 1933. A bank transfer slip dated March 2, 1933 from AEG to Delbruck Schickler & Co. in Berlin requests that 60,000 Reichsmarks be deposited in the National Treuhand, National Trusteeship, accounts for Hitler's use. This slip is reproduced on page 56. IG Farben was the most important of domestic financiers of Hitler, and as noted elsewhere, IG Farben controlled American IG. Moreover, several directors of AEG were also on the board of IG Farben, i.e. Hermann Bucker, chairman of AEG, was on the IG Farben board. So were AEG directors Julius Felkheim and Walter von Rath. IG Farben contributed 30% of the 1933 Hitler National Trusteeship or Takeover Fund. Walter Fahrenhorst of AEG was also on the board of Phoenix AG, Thyssen AG, and DMAG AG, and were all contributors to Hitler's funds. DMAG AG contributed 50,000 Reichsmarks to Hitler's fund and had a director with AEG, a notorious Friedrich Flick, an early Hitler supporter who was later convicted at the Nuremberg trials. Accumulatron Fabrik AEG was a Hitler contributor, 25,000 Reichsmark, see page 60. With 2 directors of the AEG board, August Pfeiffer and Gunther Quandt. Quandt personally owned 75% of Accumulatron Fabrik. Osram, in which the International General Electric had a 16 2/3 direct interest, also had 2 directors on the AEG board, Paul Mamroth and Heinrich Furls. Osram contributed 40,000 Reichsmarks directly to the Hitler Fund. The Otto Wolff concern, Verengeti Stahlwerke AG, recipient of substantial New York loans in the 1920s, had 3 directors on the AEG board, Otto Wolff, Henry Nathan, and Jakob Goldschmidt. Alfred Krupp Jan Bolin, sole owner of the Krupp organization and an early supporter of Hitler, was a member of Aufschrat of AEG. Robert Ferdminges, a member of Himmler's circle of friends, was also a director of AEG. In other words, almost all the German directors of the German General Electric were financial supporters of Hitler and associated not only with AEG, but with other companies financing Hitler. Walter Rathenau became director of AEG in 1899, and by the early 20th century was director of more than 100 corporations. Rathenau was also author of the Rathenau Plan, which bears a remarkable resemblance to the Swoop Plan, i.e. FDR's New Deal, but written by Swoop of GE. In other words, we have the extraordinary coincidence that the author of the New Deal Teich plans in the U.S. and Germany were also prime backers of their implementers, Hitler in Germany and the Roosevelt in the U.S. Swoop was the chairman of the board of General Electric Company and International General Electric. In 1932, the American directors of AEG were prominently connected with American banking and political circles as follows. Gerard Swoop, chairman of International General Electric and president of General Electric Company, director of National City Bank and other companies, director of AEG in Osram in Germany, author of FDR's New Deal, and members of numerous Roosevelt organizations. Owen D. Young, chairman of board of General Electric and deputy chairman, Federal Reserve Bank of New York, author with J.P. Morgan of the Young Plan, which supersedes the Dawes Plan in 1929. See Chapter 1. Clark H. Miner, president and director of International General Electric, director of British Thomson Houston, Campania, Italy, and Japan Electric Bond and Share Company, Japan. In brief, we have evidence of unquestioned authenticity, see page 56, to show that German General Electric contributed sums to Hitler's political fund. There were 4 American directors of AEG, Baldwin, Swoop, Miner, and Clark, which was 80% owned by International General Electric. Further, IGE and the 4 American directors were the largest single interest and consequently had the greatest single influence in AEG action and policies. Even further, almost all directors of AEG were connected with firms, IG Farben, Accumulatren Fabrik, etc., which contributed directly as firms to Hitler's political fund. However, only the German directors of AEG were placed on trial in Nuremberg in 1945. Technical cooperation with Krupp. Quite apart from financial assistance to Hitler, General Electric extended its assistance to cartel schemes with other Hitler backers for their mutual benefit and the benefit of the Nazi state. Cemented tungsten carbide is one example of the GE Nazi cooperation. Prior to November 1928, American industries had several sources for both tungsten carbide and tools and dies containing this hard metal composition. Among these sources were the Krupp Company of Essen, Germany, and 2 American firms to which Krupp was then shipping and selling, the Union Wire Die Corporation and Thomas Prosser and Sons. In 1928, Krupp obligated itself to grant licenses under United States patents, which it owned, to the Firth Sterling Steel Company and to the Ludlam Steel Company. Before 1928, this tungsten carbide for use in tools and dies sold in the United States for about $50 a pound. The United States patents, which Krupp claimed to own, were assigned from Osram and had been previously assigned by the Osram Company of Germany to General Electric. However, General Electric had also developed its own patents, primarily the Hoyt and Gilson patents, covering competing processes for cemented tungsten carbide. General Electric believed that it could utilize these patents independently without infringing on or competing with Krupp patents. But instead of using the GE patents independently in competition with Krupp or testing out its rights under the patent laws, General Electric worked out a cartel agreement with Krupp to pool the patents of both parties and to give General Electric a monopoly control of tungsten carbide in the United States. The first step in this cartel arrangement was taken by Carbaloy Company, Inc., a General Electric subsidiary incorporated for the purpose of exploiting tungsten carbide. The 1920s price of around $50 a pound was raised by Carbaloy to $458 a pound. Obviously, no firm could sell any great amounts of tungsten carbide in this price range, but the price would maximize profits for GE. The 1934 General Electric and Carbaloy were also able to obtain by purchase the license granted by Krupp to the Ludlam Steel Company, thereby eliminating one competitor. In 1936, Krupp was induced to refrain from further imports into the United States. Part of the price paid for the elimination from the American market of tungsten carbide manufactured abroad was a reciprocal undertaking that General Electric and Carbaloy would not export from the U.S. Thus, these American companies tied their own hands by contract or permitted Krupp to tie their hands and denied foreign markets to American industry. Carbaloy Company then acquired the business of Thomas Prosser and Son and in 1937 for nearly $1 million. Carbaloy acquired the competing business of the Union Wire Die Corporation. By refusing to sell, Krupp cooperated with General Electric and Carbaloy to persuade Union Wire Die Corporation to sell out. Licenses to manufacture tungsten carbide were then refused. A request for a license by the Crucible Steel Company was refused in 1936. A request by the Chrysler Corporation for a license refused in 1938. A license by the Triplet Electrical Instrument Company was refused on April 25, 1940. A license was also refused to the General Cable Company. The Ford Motor Company for several years expressed strong opposition to the high price policy followed by the Carbaloy Company, and at one point made a request for the right to manufacture for its own use. This was refused. As a result of these tactics, General Electric and its subsidiary Carbaloy merged in 1936 or 37 with a virtually complete monopoly of tungsten carbide in the United States. In brief, General Electric, with cooperation of another Hitler supporter, Krupp, jointly obtained for GE a monopoly in the U.S. for tungsten carbide. So when World War II began, General Electric had a monopoly at an established price of $450 a pound, almost 10 times more than the 1928 price. And use in the U.S. had been correspondingly restricted. AEG avoids the bombs in World War II. By 1939, the German electrical industry had become closely affiliated with two U.S. firms, International General Electric and International Telephone and Telegraph. The largest firms in German General Electric production and their affiliations listed in order of importance were General Electric AEG 40%, International General Electric. Siemens Schuckert 40%, Brown Boveri at C 17%. Telephone and Graph, Simmons and Haskell 60%, none. Lorenz AG 85% ITT. Radio, Telefon AEG after 1941 60%, International General Electric. Lorenz 35% ITT. Wire and Cable, Felton and Guillaume AG 20% ITT. Simmons 20% none. AEG 20% International General Electric. In other words, in 1939, the German electrical equipment industry was concentrated into a few major corporations linked in an international cartel and by stock ownership to two major U.S. corporations. This industrial complex was never a prime target for bombing in World War II. The AEG and ITT plants were hit only incidentally in area raids and then but rarely. The electrical equipment plants bombed as targets were not those affiliated with U.S. firms. It was Brown Boveri at Mannheim and Siemensstadt in Berlin, which were not connected with the U.S., who were bombed. As a result, German production of electrical war equipment rose steadily throughout World War II, peaking as late as 1944. According to the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey reports, in the opinion of Speer's assistants and plant officials, the war effort in Germany was never hindered in any important matter by any shortage of electrical equipment. One example of the non-bombing policy of German General Electric was the AEG plant at 185 Mugenhofstrasse, Nuremberg. Study of this plant's output in World War II is of interest because it illustrates the extent to which purely peacetime production was converted to war work. The pre-war plant manufactured household equipment such as hot plates, electrical ranges, electric irons, toasters, industrial baking ovens, radiators, water heaters, kitchen ovens, and industrial heaters. In 1939, 1940, and 1941, most of the Nuremberg plant's production was shifted to manufacture of war material. Metal parts for communications equipment and munitions such as bombs and mines were made. Other war production consisted of parts for searchlights and amplifiers. The following tabulation very strikingly shows the conversion to war work. I'll just briefly pause here, and then we'll move on. The actual damage by bombing to this plant was insignificant. No serious damage occurred until the raids of February 20th and 21st, 1945, near the end of the war, and then protection had been fairly well developed. Raids during which bombs struck in the plant area and the trifling damage done are listed as below. Date of raid, March 8th, 1943, 30-stick type IB, trifling, but 3 storehouses outside the plant destroyed. September 9th, 1944, none, blast damage, trifling, gas, and blackout curtain damage. November 26th, 14,000-pound bomb, HE, in open space in plant grounds, wood shop destroyed, water main broken. February 20th, 1945, 2 HE, 3 buildings damaged. February 21st, 1945, 5 HE, mini IBs, 3 buildings damaged, administrative building damaged, and enameling works damaged by HE. Another example of German General Electric plant not bombed is the AEG plant at Koppelsdorf, producing radar sets and bomber antenna. Other AEG plants which were not bombed and their war equipment production were a long list of German names I'm not going to read. That the AEG plants in Germany were not bombed in World War II was confirmed by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, offered by such academics as John K. Galbraith and such Wall Streeters as George W. Ball and Paul H. Knights. Their German electrical equipment industry report dated January 1947 includes: the industry has never been attacked as a basic target, but a few plants, Brown Boveri at Mannheim, Bosch at Stuttgart, and Siemensstadt in Berlin, have been subjected to precision raids. Many others were hit in area raids. At the end of World War II, an Allied investigation known as FIAT was sent to examine bomb damage to German electrical industry plants. The team for the electrical industry consisted of Alexander G.P. Sanders of International Telephone and Telegraph of New York, Whitworth Ferguson of Ferguson Electric Company, New York, and Eric J. Borgman of Westinghouse Electric. Although the stated objective of the team was to examine the effects on Allied bombing of German targets, the effect of this particular team was to get the German electrical equipment industry back into production as soon as possible. Whitworth Ferguson wrote a report dated March 31st, 1945 on the AEG Oslin work and concluded this plant is immediately available for production of fine metal parts and assemblies. To conclude, we find that both Rathenau of AEG and Swoop of General Electric in the U.S. had similar ideas of putting the state to work for their own corporate ends. General Electric was prominent in financing Hitler. It profited handsomely from war production, and yet it managed to evade bombing in World War II. Obviously, the story briefly surveyed here deserves a much more thorough and official investigation. Yeah, okay. So we will leave it at chapter 4 and pick up there next time. The chat. End of credit and credits. Ricardo Williams, Moose. Hello. Hello. King Salmonfish. Shiona Page. Hello. Let's see. Yeah, all right. That's all I got for tonight. Tune in next. Actually, I'll be taking a break for a while. So chapter 4 will have to hold until I'm done sometime in September. This is Todd Lewis, the Praise of Flight podcast, signing off.